Welcome to lesson 3 of T5 technical training videos, and it is the last lesson for learning how to deploy Yellowfin. So just to recap very quickly, hopefully you've gone through lesson 1 and 2, which deals with performance, which deals with capacity estimation factors, followed by clustering, and what are the things we need to learn about clustering. And we're now ending with the common issues and considerations for go live. What are the things you need to know, at least arm your team with, and how to actually investigate operational issues as well, and what's involved. So starting off, what are the common issues and considerations do we need to learn about Yellowfin and actually learn how to maintain it from an operational point of view once we deploy it? There are commonly 4 issues that appear in a lot of our support emails, and they seem to occur around the pre- and post-installation period. These issues are centered around memory, they're centered around database, ports, and upgrades. So starting off with memory first, an issue that occurs most often is when a person tries to run an installer for the first time and it appears that the installer is hanging. Usually that occurs due to an out-of-memory error. Right? It's a scenario that it means that the operating system might not be allocating enough memory to run the installer fully. Which can be solved simply by indicating and allowing more memory to the installer. So you can actually do that with the cross-platform installer, which is a jar file. It allows the user to configure the memory options. And you can actually do that with the -xmx parameter here. So for example, if I'm calling Yellowfin jar, which I would do naturally with a Java -jar syntax, I can add an additional parameter here to basically allocate 1 GB of memory to the installer process. And you'll find that after doing that, that usually solves the issue. The reason why nowadays the installer takes a bit more memory is because we have started pushing certain things like the geopacks as part of the installer. So for example, we can now choose certain things or certain packs to come out of the installer and have that be installed automatically as part of the process, which again will take more resources. The next scenario where the out-of-memory issues might also surface is actually during the operation of Yellowfin. Naturally, when this happens, it gets logged into your Yellowfin logs, which we'll talk a bit more about where they are, what they mean. But essentially, you might be, creating some, resource-hungry reports or, some GIS charts that, has, 10,000 points in an area, and you might naturally run out of memory. Or say you're loading a geopack, a particular large region, that could also happen as well. So in cases like these, you need to maybe configure the files to have a higher max memory limit, and you can do so in a few different files in Yellowfin. We've actually indicated where to do this in one of our earlier lessons, but just as a recap, you can do that in the Catalina batch file if you're running a Windows deployment. You can do that in the Catalina shell script file for other platforms, which is Unix-based, and you can also do that in the service batch file if you're running it as a Windows service. The line to actually modify is the set Java ops file, line, where you can actually indicate what the larger max memory limit is. So it will be, in this XMX line, it will be 1 gig, and the XMS line basically indicates what the minimum is. So how do you want to start, in the max range for your memory limits? Okay, so if I was running into out-of-memory errors when I'm operating Yellowfin, I would naturally increase this parameter here on the right. Okay. Now, there's also a different memory issue that could be, that you could be running into, and that's a permgen space out-of-memory error. You only do run into this if the memory you've allocated to the permgen space isn't quite enough for the Yellowfin code base. As Yellowfin grows from one version to the next, we're including more and more features, and in certain features, it might need a bit more space for certain code modules. So if you're running a really old deployment of Yellowfin, using the existing configs from way back then for scenarios like this, you might run into issues where the memory that's allocated to the permgen space isn't quite enough, as back then the number was a lot smaller. So if you run into that, and again, this will be seen from your Yellowfin logs, the area to actually modify would again be in the same files that you saw from before, so your Catalina files, except that the line to modify would be slightly different. So you would actually, in this case, go to your perm size line, and you can actually allocate a max perm size, which again, in this example, I've allocated 1 gig as my max, and I'm starting with 512 meg. Okay, now we can just very quickly go into our application folder here and actually search for that. So you can actually go into the area here and then easily do that within the files. So your Catalinas and your service batch if you want to. Okay, so they're all available there, and you can modify them there immediately. Now, one important thing to note is that if you're running it as a Windows service, you can modify the service batch file, but modifying that doesn't mean your existing Yellowfin is changed. It only allows if you want to reinstall a Yellowfin Windows service in which the new settings will take effect. If you already have an existing Windows services, then what we advise you to do is to go to Yellowfin App Server bin folder and run this line here in command line. So you can basically go to that folder in your DOS box and then run tomcat7 exe and then with the slashes here, which essentially will call up the properties for the Windows service, in which you can see in this screen. You can type your max values into your maximum memory pool parameter, click OK and apply, and then it will be automatically applied to your existing Windows service. Otherwise, with the first method, you can technically modify the service batch file, remove the Windows service, and then re-add the Yellowfin service as well. Okay. So the second most common issue are database issues, and they're not particularly real database issues, but mainly around the installer not being able to connect to a specified database when you want to create a Yellowfin repository. So in this installer, it actually allows you to type in a target instance where you can create a Yellowfin database, and then sometimes people complain that, oh, I can't do it. Or they go, I can actually connect to the specified database, but I can't actually complete the installation because of this particular error. The reason why these two happens is because, firstly, in the first issue is sometimes the database isn't actually up. So in these cases, we actually advise the users or the clients to ensure that the connection details are correct, firstly. Secondly, if it's correct, to ensure that the database account used actually has the required permissions to create things like create tables and update tables and write to the database. So I think a lot of people sometimes don't understand that that the user that they put into to do the installer needs to have admin rights. And a very quick way of testing this out is to actually have some sort of external database management tool. Like, for example, if you're using SQL Server, you could use the Management Studio and check that the account that I'm providing the Yellowfin installer is actually correct, and it can actually do the things that I want it to do, like create a table and create a view. The third issue that's most common is ports. So sometimes when people install Yellowfin, they choose a particular port that might already be in use. For example, if people choose port 80, port 80 is a really popular port, and again, many things run off that port, like Skype and Team Talk apps and a lot of other apps, which again is the main web port. So Yellowfin by default now moves it to 8080, which hopefully is a rare port for most things. But if it's taken, then you will find out when you start the Yellowfin batch file, it starts and it quits immediately and complains that there's a JVM bind address already in use. So if you see that in your logs, then you know that that port's already been taken, and you probably need to change the port and have it start up on a different port. You can do that by simply going to the file that's available in your Yellowfin folder in app server in conf, then locate the server XML file, and opening that will give you an example of this as you see here. So I've highlighted and take a picture of the important section, and what you're actually looking for is the connector port XML node here. So you can see in my installation is 8081. If that's taken and Yellowfin's complaining about that, feel free to change the connector port to something else, like maybe 777 or or 6669 or something like that. I'll leave it up to you to decide a number, but you can do that. And by default, we also have 8085 as the server port for shutdown commands, and In the very, very rare occurrence that 8085 is taken, then you can come back here and change the server port shutdown to be something else as well. Okay. Now, lastly, the last most common issue in terms of what's actually reported to support teams are the upgrades. So we've got Yellowfin running for some time. We see there's a new Yellowfin version available. We would like to upgrade, and then we run the installer, and then it fails at a certain stage with an error called error update query. The reason why that happens is because the specified database account that was used during the initial install no longer has the permission to make database changes. So this might be administrators who install it for the first time, provide admin rights to an account to install, and then maybe down the track took away the permissions for security's sake or just for whatever processes they were running. And then now that the update has, is trying to use the same account to do updates to the schema, it can't actually do that because it's not allowed to. So when it complains about this error, then you need to go back to the database account, using whatever tool you have, and basically allocate the permissions and rights to it. In any case, if you want to roll back an upgrade, you can do so. For example, in the event of a patch failure and it doesn't quite complete and you're a bit worried about that, you can roll back your Yellowfin file system to a previous version simply by restoring from a zip file. So as we covered in lesson 2, each time you run an upgrade on Yellowfin, the upgrade process firstly makes a backup of the file system into a zip file, which is essentially the root folder, and it places it into the backup folder in your Yellowfin installation directory. This is really useful. If you ever need to just go, hang on, I want to reverse this, just simply take that zip file, unpack that root folder contained there over your existing root folder, and then you've essentially rolled yourself back into the previous version at the file system state. If you're worried that it's made changes to the database in the back end, they can simply take, hopefully, a Yellowfin database backup that you've done before the upgrade and then restore that over your existing Yellowfin database. Okay? So if you actually follow lesson 2, you would know that before you achieve or attempt an upgrade, you would first do a Yellowfin database backup first, as well as a root directory backup before you go ahead with the upgrade.